I think every beginner artist should try painting with just 3 colors, at least in the beginning, because it'll help you to learn color mixing faster. Another benefit of it is that you won't be so overwhelmed with having like a dozen colors to choose from on your palette. In this video, I'll do a painting demonstration using just 3 colors. I picked up this kit from Liquitex, and these 3 colors should work pretty well. So we have quinacridone crimson, yellow medium azo, phthalocyanine blue, and there's a tube of titanium 08. So let's set up the palette, and I'll get started with the painting. I recommend that you set your palette up the same way every time. That way you get used to where the colors are and you don't have to think about it. I'll just squeeze these out real quick. And here's the quinacridone crimson. You could also use naphthol red or a pyrrole red or even cadmium red medium. Phthalo blue is available in pretty much every line of artist paints. Yellow medium azo is another one. It's PY74. If you don't have this, you could use a transparent yellow. I think that would work pretty well. Or even a cadmium yellow. And then finally, I'll squeeze out more titanium 08 because you use more weight than you do other colors. When you paint with acrylics, it helps to have a mister so that you can keep your paints wet. Another option is to use a stay wet palette. I have another video about how to set up a wet palette. The link is in the description below. This one here is a new one I'm testing out. It seems to work pretty well. The mist is really fine, so you don't get huge drops of water on your palette. So we'll see how that works now. Another way to keep acrylics wet is to use some sort of retarder. This is the retarder gel medium from Liquitex. They also have a fluid version of that, so it's more liquid, and that will thin your paint out if that's what you want. This says you can mix up to 25% by volume into the paint, and it extends the dry time by 40%. And what you want to keep in mind is you don't want to go beyond that 25% because the paint might dry tacky or it might take a real long time to dry. So I'm just putting it off to the side of each color and then I'll just mix it in. So I'll just go ahead and mix that in. Just adding this medium will make the paint dry slower. You won't have to mist it as much. And it should help with the blending too. Just trying to get this mixed in thoroughly. So I'll mix in the rest of them the same way. If that seems like it's too much or it's a hassle, you could try the Slo-Dri Medium. And that's kind of like a gloss medium with retarder mixed into it. So you don't really have to worry about adding too much. You can add as much as this as you want to the paint. You just have to keep in mind that the more they add to the paint, the more transparent it'll become. I'm going to start the drawing, but I want to cover this up so it doesn't dry up. I usually just like mist the lid a little bit and give this a little bit of a spray. That way it won't dry up when I'm working on the drawing. A good way to close this is to close the corners first and then press down the sides. I have an entire video about how I set this palette up. I use it with a glass cutting board inside, and that makes it easy to scrape up any dried paint. You can also use it with a sponge to keep it wet, and that way you won't have to mist it. This is the photograph that I'm going to be working from. I'll probably change the background. I'm thinking about using like a cobalt teal for the background and maybe put in some brush strokes. I often use acrylic paint markers for the sketching. I'll start with like a light gray, that way I can make a lot of mistakes, and then I can go over it with a darker color to correct them. I made an entire video about how I sketch with acrylic markers. There's a link to it in the description below. One advantage to using markers is that you can use a ruler and get that table edge perfectly straight without any effort. I'm happy with the drawing, and now it's time to start mixing colors. I thought a good place to start would be the dark color of the apple. The problem with judging colors is a lot of times your mind thinks it knows what color something is, but in reality it's something different. That might sound a little weird, but if you think about what color an apple is, you're probably picturing a very vivid red. One tip for being able to perceive colors more accurately is to use a color isolator. You can just punch a hole in a piece of paper. This is a piece of mat board that I cut a hole into. And then you can view the color by itself. So you can see how dark that red is. It's kind of like a dark burgundy. And you can move it around to different sections of the apple to perceive the color more accurately. This section here is a tricky color. I'll have to mix that later. I see there's more blue in there. Another option is use something like Photoshop and use the eyedropper tool to sample the color. That way, when you see a big section of it, you have a much more accurate view of what it is. Obviously, you would start with the quinacridone crimson. And at first glance, it just needs to go darker. But there's no black in this kit. How would you make it darker? The thing is, you don't need black to make a color darker. In fact, you can make black from these colors. I've demonstrated that before. I often use blue to make red go darker. And that kind of makes a burgundy color. I might have to add a little bit of yellow in there to make it less purplish. But that right away seems much more closer than what we started with. Maybe I'll put a little bit of yellow in there. You see what that does? It makes it a little bit more brown. And that's too much. It's a little bit too brown. So next I'll try and mix this reddish color and maybe some of this pale yellow pinkish color. So there's a little bit of yellow and quinacridone crimson. This quinacridone crimson sort of is biased towards magenta. So if you want like a warmer red, add a little bit of yellow. That's not too bad. One thing you'll find is that there's no set of 3 colors that will give you every single color that you need. So there might be a few colors that aren't totally perfect compared to the photograph, but that's okay. If you get pretty close, that's all that matters, and the value is what matters most. If it's too light or too dark, it'll look weird. That's not too bad for this section like right here. And that's the thing, is when you paint, you don't mix every single section that you see in this apple. I mixed the main color here, some of this red, and then the basic color for this highlight. And then when you're painting, you can dip into the other colors and adjust them. Now for this highlight color, I'll start with white and yellow. We could take a look at it with the isolator. I think that's the hardest thing with color mixing, is just identifying what color something is. So that's white and yellow. It looks too pure, like this is too yellow, it needs to go more neutral. So what would you add to make that more neutral? If you add this crimson, it'll turn more orange. And then if you add a little bit more blue, that will dull that orange down. So that's what we'll try, a little bit of each of these colors. And then just a tiny amount of this phthalo blue, because it's really potent. You can mix it off to the side just to be safe. And you'll notice that it starts to gray it down compared to this color here. This is kind of like a butter color, and this is more of a beige. So it's not too bad. I think it still needs to go a little bit more neutral, so add a little bit more of each of these. And that's what simplifies this color mixing, is that there's only so many colors to work from. You have a yellow and you want to dull it down, it's usually a combination of these two that you need to make it more neutral. So add a little bit more red. I'll mix in a little bit more of the red and the blue. That's not too bad for that area there. I think a little bit more white. It just looks too dark. The other thing too is a computer printout isn't as bright as a computer screen or viewing things in life, so you could make things intentionally more vivid if you wanted to. That's not too bad right there for the outer edge. It's like I said, as I paint, I can dip into the white, make it lighter for the outside edge, and add more of the red for this section. So for now, I have the dark area, the reddish section in the middle, and then I have this off-white color for the highlight. Now it's time for the fun part. I'll start painting it. I'll start with the dark section, and I'll just brush some of that in there, see what it looks like. The one thing about using a palette of colors like this is they're rather transparent. A lot of times you need to add white to a color, and that helps make it more opaque. So this section will be easy to paint in. But you can see I kind of have to put this in a little bit thicker so it covers. I'm not too worried about blending. I'm just putting the color in where I think it needs to be. I have the dark section put in, and then the next step would be to start transitioning it over to the reddish color. So that's what I was talking about, is I can add some of this red in order to get these colors here. I already have the dark color in my brush, and then I can just add some of this reddish color and mix them together. It doesn't have to be exact. You can also test it out on strips of paper, so that's not too bad. And I do feel like the retarder gel is making this stay wet longer. I can pick up some of this dark color and feather it into the red area. It helps to have a soft bristle brush, especially if you're using thin paints. These are from Golden Maple, and they have soft bristles on them. They provided these brushes to me for free to try out in this video. When you first start filling this in, you might feel like it's too dark, and that's because the white background is making it look darker than what it actually is. One thing to help with that is you can tone the canvas first with like a burnt sienna. I made an entire video about how to do that. It's not totally necessary, but it does seem to help if you have trouble judging colors. I'm going to put in the most vivid red, so I figure I'll wipe the paint off my brush and give it a rinse. That way the red will be as pure as possible. For these light sections, I'll add a little bit of the off-white beige color, and I'll start painting in these areas. It makes sense to work in sections like that from one area to another because you don't have to wash your brush as much. I can wipe a little bit off my brush and then add some of this beige color to it. When you add white to it, it covers much easier. You can see this is really transparent, whereas this has a lot more opacity to it. I have the pink around the outside of this, and then I'll just start adding more and more of the highlight color. It's a little bit blotchy. There's like a little bit of a texture to the skin. In this early stage, this looks really messy. There's just patches of colors, and it doesn't look right. We just have to keep going. Once in a while, I'll just give it a light misting. That way my colors won't skin over. For the brightest sections of this apple, I'm going to use a separate brush. That way I won't have to clean anything out, and it'll save me time. Now this looks kind of dark, but the background is going to be darker than this. Around the stem, there's highlight sections, so I'll put those in there while I have this on my brush. It's time to put this color in here, and it's kind of tricky. It's this color, but it's lighter and more neutral. Problem with the color isolator is that sometimes the section is a little bit too small, but you can get just a little area of it and get an idea. Here's that dark color, and like I said, it's a little bit lighter. You can see that the photograph is darker in that section. I think I'll add a little bit of the phthalo blue and see what that does. That does seem to be closer to some of those sections. If I wanted to make it a little bit duller, I could add a little bit of this beige color to it. It's not too bad. I'll put that in. Now, would you think that this apple had a little bit of like purple in it? That's what's tricky about color mixing. Looking at this, it's tempting to go in here and to fix all this up and smooth out some of these edges. But for now, I'm just going to leave it. I'm trying to block in the basic colors. Like I said, it's hard to judge it against white, so if you get a little bit of color everywhere in the painting, it makes it easier to make corrections. As it gets towards the edge, it gets even lighter, so I'll add some white in there. And I don't think I'll add the pure white, I'll add some of this off-white beige color. Let's go ahead and put that in. This section here is like this purplish color mixed in with the darkest color. I'll take a touch of this dark color, add it in here. And that's not too bad. I'll go back to my darkest color. I want to go along the bottom edge and finish that part off. So it's not quite the darkest color. And there's also some of this orange color from the leaf being reflected right here, so I have to add that in there. I haven't mixed that orange, but I could just add a little bit of yellow and some of the red. Maybe just a dash of this off-white color. That might be a little light, but I can work some of this dark color back into it. And the darkest part of this whole apple is like right down here. As I said, I can adjust this. If I want to make it darker, I can add more blue in here. Maybe a dash of the yellow. And put that dark section in. Just making these small adjustments does make it seem a little bit more round, because a sphere will have a darker edge at the bottom. And I'm coming back in here and making this section just a little bit darker. There's this dark edge that I put in, but then there seems to be a lighter reflection right after that, and it goes all the way up here. So I'm going to try and put that in, and then maybe put in some of these colors by the stem. From there, I'll put in the background. I have most of the apple colors blocked in. Now I want to put some color around it. That way it'll make it easier to judge these colors, and I just need to progress with the rest of the painting anyways. So I was thinking of putting in like a turquoise color for the background with some brush strokes, and then this will be like a wood color. So I'll work on that next. Turquoise is basically a light bluish green. I think I need to spray this. I can tell it's starting to dry around the edges, so that's a sign that I need to apply some water to it. Here's a light blue, and then I'll add a little bit of the yellow to make it greenish. I think maybe a little bit more white. It still looks too bluish. Turquoise has more of a green color to it. I'm also thinking I could mix up some variations of this that are darker and lighter, just so the background isn't like one uniform shade. I'm thinking the darker areas can be over here because the light's coming from this section. I'm not looking to be too careful for this background either. I'm just going to brush in some color. I also texturized this panel with super heavy gesso, and that gives it some subtle brush marks. I can already tell that's making the lighter edge come more forward, like it's separating it from the background. The other thing too is I'm trying to paint over these lines, so I don't have brown lines outlining everything. I'll just scrub this in. I think I might put some warm color in here too, just for a variety, but I just want to get rid of the white for now. I'm going to cut in around this leaf, and then I'll start working on the table. I need to mix up some of this wood color. I'm running out of room on my palette. I think I can clean this section up though and mix it there. In fact, that turquoise won't harm it at all. I'll add some yellow in there. A little bit of the crimson. That might be a little too much. I could add more yellow in there and more white. I have an entire video about how to mix brown. There's a link to it in the description below. If I had more quinacridone crimson and the yellow, it's more of an orangey color, which I might use in some sections. It's not too bad for that edge right there. I mixed the yellow and the quinacridone crimson together. It's more vibrant than this wood color right here. If you remember, I had some of that turquoise in there, and that's what makes that duller. So I could just take some of this and add that in there. If it's too much on the greenish side, you just add a little bit more of the quinacridone crimson to it. And I can adjust it as I go. I think it needs to be a little bit more reddish maybe a touch of white. I don't worry about getting the first layer exact because I'm probably going to come back and correct some of these things. The thing about having a chisel edge like that is you can use the tip to get into smaller areas, such as this section here between the apple and the leaf. I need a darker color for the shadows and the underside of the ledge of the table. So here's this dark color. I can add more of the quinacridone to it and a little bit of the phthalo blue. That's pretty good for this section here between the apple and the leaf. I'll put that in there. It does get quite a bit darker under here, but I'll just put this in as a solid color for now. I can also use that color for the front edge of this table. Sometimes when you're working, it helps to clean your palette and start over in some areas, make more room for new mixtures. Some of this is dry, so I'll just scrape it up. You can also scrape up the color and then move it to another section. That way you can clean up more of that palette. Yeah, this is already dry, but I could probably save some of this red. I was able to save some of those colors that were still wet. Now I have all this extra room to mix colors. It's kind of like starting over again. You feel like you have more room to mix new colors. When you let your palette get completely filled up, it starts to feel restrictive and you have no room to mix new colors. I'll mix this dark yellow-orange color next. I'll start with the yellow and a little bit of the quinacridone crimson. It's a little bit too much. It's not too bad right there. It needs a little bit more yellow. This knife blade is mostly this apple color, so I'll just use the same colors. And then this is kind of like an off-white grayish color. It gets a little lighter on this side, just like the apple does. It's reflecting like this section right here. I need to mix like that off-white grayish color for the part of the blade here that doesn't reflect the apple. I would start with phthalo blue and the quinacridone crimson and make a purple color. Add white to it. And then add some of the yellow. And every time you mix it, it's a little bit different, so you have to make judgments. Add a little bit more crimson to it, more yellow. So that's much too dark. I'll add white to lighten it up. It mixed up way too much. I'll add more white to it. Maybe a little bit more bluish. There's like a fine highlight that runs along the edge. It's where these detail brushes come in handy. I'm going to work on the wood handle before I do any more with this blade. This blade might look a little weird because this is red, but that's just a reflection of the apple. I'll just take some of this red and add more blue to it, and that should make it brownish. This front part of the handle is probably the darkest part of the knife. The top part of this wood blade is kind of a weird color. It's like a pinkish neutral gray. It's a lot different than the brown color on the side of the knife. I think what I'll do is take some of this gray color and mix it in with the brown. It's not too bad, maybe a little bit more brown. I think that's about it. I used like this apple color and a little bit of the gray to paint in these rivets. The only section that's not really filled in yet is the shadow color underneath this leaf. I'll put that in next. It's definitely more orange than the rest of the shadow color. I have all the colors filled in. Now it's just a matter of going back and refining it. Overall, it looks a little bit rough, and I just need to refine the blending and some of the colors. Here's where the Slo-Dri Medium might come in handy. As I stated before, it's basically like a gloss medium with retarder built into it. So you can add as much of this to your paint as you want to. I normally pour some out onto my palette, and then you can use it to make colors more transparent. So I have this off-white color of the apple, and I can mix some of that in there, and I get like a transparent glaze of that color. And since it dries slower, I can add some of the red in there and sort of feather out the edge a little bit. So I have this dark red area and I have this off-white, and I could just keep going back and forth between these two colors and feather them into each other. Part of it is that it stays wet longer and you can blend it into each other, but the other option is you can apply thin layers of glazes over the top of dry paint just to make subtle changes to the color. Here's a good example. There's some subtle red areas in this highlight color, and I could just add a bunch of this Slo-Dri Medium to the red And then that way it creates like a subtle pink color. I added more of that red in there, and I can work in reverse too, where I start with the off-white color. I can add the Slo-Dri Medium to it and create thin glazes of that color too. This is the off-white color. It's kind of blotchy on the apple, so I'm just dabbing it in there. Then when I want a more subtle version of that, I add the Slo-Dri Medium into it. The final stages of the painting are where I try to pull everything together. I adjust the colors and I spend some time adding in more details and subtle effects. I took a break, and after looking at it for a while, I realized that this background is probably a little too dark and it might be a little too saturated. I have most of the colors in, I just feel like I need to wrap it up and put the finishing touches onto it. I finished off the painting, and I have a few thoughts about these colors in particular. A few of the challenges I had with this painting is that these colors are very transparent, so if you want to paint over a mistake, it's hard to do. These are known as modern pigments. They're transparent and they're very vibrant. They're great for creating glazes, but the transparency means they don't cover over mistakes very well. If that becomes a problem, you can try using a set of traditional primaries such as cadmium red, cadmium yellow, and ultramarine blue. Up next, you can watch my video 5 color mixing tips for beginners or color theory in 5 minutes. Please like and subscribe if you found this video useful. Thanks for watching.